So thanks everybody for being here, and I just wanted to make sure you know that in addition to everybody who's been able to join us here in this room yesterday and today, we're also joined by 30 different campuses and communities online who've been watching the live stream, which I think is pretty awesome. So I think it's really important that the fact that you guys here have been able to organize this amazing teach-in and bring together so many impressive and inspiring speakers, panels, and interactive discussions. We're also giving that opportunity to people in campuses and communities around the country that maybe didn't have the capacity, that didn't have the funds, where there wasn't an organized student group or a department that could get behind things. So I wanted to make sure you knew that. I'm Dana Brown. I'm the National Teach-Ins Coordinator for the Next Systems Project. So I get to work on events like this all over the country, and it's been incredibly inspiring to meet people as we've started this process, and I can't wait to see how it continues to develop. We've still got many more teach-ins to go, and I'll be excited to share with you information and all the takeaways that have come out of teach-ins in places from Seattle to Detroit to New York over the last several weeks. So without further ado, we're just going to jump in. This next panel is about how we take the next steps. So far we've been talking about what some of those potential models are for a next system, and now we're going to talk about how we get there. What are the day-to-day strategies and what are the long-term strategies? And I'm really honored to be here with a panel of folks who've dedicated their lives to this, who've been working for, you know, they don't look old enough, but decades on not only theorizing, but implementing and working with communities in many different places, trying out things, learning from our past, and helping us all think about how we get to that place that we all know where we want to be going. So I'm going to introduce our speakers one by one. They're going to give their talks. I'm going to ask a question or two, and then I'm definitely going to throw it over to you, and there'll be plenty of time for your questions, so I really hope you jump in. If you're in the back and you don't mind, I'd love to invite you to come a little further forward. None of us bite. And if you're in the front and you've just been sitting too long, feel free to get up and stretch real quick. We also won't think any less of you. So as we get started, we're going to start with Ben Manski here, who some of you know because, among other things, he's currently a PhD student here in sociology, but that is so not it. He's also a lawyer. He is somebody who's been committed to building a movement for democracy here in the United States for a while. He's the president of the Liberty Tree Foundation, a strategy center that he founded in 2004. As well as being a co-founder of Move to Amend and an associate fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. In 2010, Ben Manski co-founded the Wisconsin Wave, which played a leading role in the Wisconsin Uprising of 2011, and which continues today. In 2012, he managed Jill Stein's the Jill Stein for President campaign, and from 2001 to 2004, he served as a co-chair of the Green Party of the United States. He's also a lifelong union member. So please help me welcome Ben Manski.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, everyone here. I want to start off by suggesting that if we want to change the system, we must begin with the recognition that social systems are systems of power. They're systems of power. They are systems that empower or constrain, that undermine and maintain. And in the case of capitalism, capitalism is a system that empowers those who own capital, and at the same time constrains the possibilities for those who don't own much capital to govern ourselves. Capitalism is a system that undermines the capacity of working people and of poor people to develop financial independence. And at the same time, it maintains unproductive financial supremacy for global capitalists. That's where I want to start. So then I have to ask us, what does it mean when we organize movements that demand something different from the current system, and yet which leaves that system intact? What does that mean? And if we are serious about system change, How do we build a movement to change the relations of power so that we, the people, can collectively provide for ourselves with the justice and sustainability that we all need? There are different forms of movements that seek a change in power. Those movements that bring together disparate struggles in society on a social basis to transform power are what we call democracy movements. We desperately need a strong democracy movement in the United States today. We desperately need that. We don't get justice without democracy. We don't get sustainability without democracy. The good news is that we have a democracy movement, but the labor in front of us involves making that movement stronger, more inclusive, more grounded, more militant, and more sophisticated at the same time, both militant and sophisticated at the same time. The democracy movement in the United States today is operating on at least two different levels. The democracy movement is operating sectorally, and it's operating on a social basis. What do I mean by sectorally? Well, here we are within a social sector right now, within higher education, within the sector of education. By sectors, I'm referring to the areas in which we live our lives, right? The major institutions of society, education, religion, the workplace, the family. And the good news, as we've heard, is that there are many, many people, more people than we can possibly imagine in the United States and around the world who are working on sectoral campaigns for democratization right now. And those campaigns come in a couple different forms. Some of them are alternative. We've talked a lot about alternatives today and yesterday. We've heard about community land trusts, community-supported agriculture, community cooperatives, worker-owned cooperatives, hybrids of these, credit unions, public banks, you name it. Those institutions of the new economy that the Democracy Collaborative and so many others have worked to bring together are growing. And I know they work because I lived in them and I worked in them. I lived 5 years of my life entirely within the cooperative sector in Madison, Wisconsin. Community-owned pharmacy, community radio, community printing press, food from local farmers. We owned our co-ops, 12 co-ops in one system. We provided childcare. It works. I drove cab for the largest worker-owned enterprise at that time in the United States, Union Cab of Madison. They work. The other thing that is a relatively new development, I think, in the last 20 years are campaigns within sectors that are about democratization. They're about transforming existing institutions through the posing of democratic demands. When students demand that we have representation on boards of trustees and boards of governors and boards of regents, those are democratic demands. When Black Lives Matter demands community control over the police, that is a democratic demand. When voters self-organize, as they did in Ohio in 2004, to demand a recount, and as we did 3 times in Wisconsin in the course of the Wisconsin Uprising, those are democratic demands. Those types of campaigns, these pro-democracy campaigns, I think are critical because they develop capacity, knowledge. They are part of the struggle for power, not just for a redistribution of the spoils or for a little bit more crumbs off the master's table, but for control, right? So we have the alternative campaigns, the alternative efforts, and we have these democratization campaigns growing in many sectors of American society today and around the world. The other place where the democracy movement is real today is on a social basis. It cuts across sectors. And I had a conversation with a famous sociologist and a famous organizer who I won't name. I don't want to sort of use him as a straw man, so I'll just use his arguments as a straw argument, who said, "What democracy movement are you talking about? I don't see any signs of it. There are no signs of it in the New York Times. If I can't see it, then it's not there." And I said, I was there in the streets of Seattle in 1999 when 100,000 people shut down the World Trade Organization and came up on the spot with a slogan, "This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like." And that slogan resonated around the world. And I spared you the rhythm of the chant. I'll keep it analytical here. But I was there. I was part of that and building that for years before with hundreds of thousands of other people. And I was there in Wisconsin when we planned the uprising against Scott Walker and austerity in Wisconsin, knowing that we were doing so in solidarity with other movements that were fighting austerity and capitalism around the world, in communication with them, knowing what was at stake, and knowing that what we did in Madison and in Reedsburg and in Rhinelander and in Milwaukee was going to inspire similar things elsewhere, and planning ahead about how that might happen, right? That was a democracy movement. The mass media doesn't want to tell you that, but if you look at any photograph from the Wisconsin uprising, the number one word you will see there is democracy, right? It was a struggle for power. We saw that with Occupy. We've seen that with Black Lives Matter, as we've seen. This very powerful community-based approach to taking resistance and transforming it into struggles for power and for structural reform. So we have a democracy movement. Where I want to end is to address where we need to go with the democracy movement today. I haven't even mentioned Move to Amend, which you heard about yesterday. I could go on and on, but we're limited with time. So maybe I'll have more examples I can bring in the discussion. But where do we need to go? Well, first of all, we need to speak democracy's name. We need to pose democratic demands. We need to be clear that we are in a struggle for power, that we are building democratic institutions, and that we are demanding democratic reforms. If we don't do that, if you don't actually centralize the question of power in your demands, in our language, in our rhetoric, in our practices, it's going to be pretty hard to create a movement. So that's a starting place. Secondly, we need to unite domestically. And there are efforts to do that. I want to invite everybody in this room and everybody who's watching elsewhere around the country to come to the Democracy Convention in Minnesota next summer. This will be the third national gathering of people who are working in each of these sectors. There are 10 different conferences that meet at once. People working on voting rights and election reform. People working on community democracy. There's a community democracy conference. There's a democratizing defense conference with people who are actually working to transform what it means to transfer the structure of national defense and what that actually looks like in this country. So go to democracyconvention.org, you can find out more about that. We need to unite domestically. We need to continue to transnationalize, to build the global democracy movement. The fact that this is the demand in the streets of Paris and of Manila and of Santiago de Chile all at the same time is not a coincidence. The networks are there. We need to continue to build on that. We need to develop capacity in institutions and people. We need institutions that, and resources and organizations that are expressly dedicated to the democracy movement. We have more today than we did before. We need to continue to build those. We need to build democratic leadership, which is to say all of us. As Garl Pervitz said yesterday, I'm talking to the person who's sitting in your chair. We need to build the capacity of our movement for the long haul. We need to develop political independence and militancy. And I say that from the experience, particularly of Wisconsin, which is with me every day. And there are actually a number of Wisconsinites up here and in the room. If you engage in a struggle for power, you have to win. If you don't win, the cost is incredible. The pain that people are feeling, the destruction of lives in Wisconsin that is ongoing, is hard to imagine unless you have been through something similar. Some people in this room have been, are, but the scale of what has happened in Wisconsin has attacked the entire fabric of the society there, right? So we have to develop our militancy because this is not an easy fight. And then finally, we have to dare to win, to pick up a slogan of the 1960s, in which I also found on a fortune cookie in New York City. I think it might have come from Mao originally. But we not only have to dare to struggle, we have to dare to win. And we have to know that it will be a struggle, and we have to develop strategies for that struggle. We have to know that at some point, as has happened repeatedly throughout my personal experience, they will bust heads, they will shoot us. My wife is videotaping right now. She was shot in the back 4 times with rubber bullets in Miami. My sister's boyfriend had his head cracked. Nonviolent, peaceful protesters. Actually, in Sarah's case, she was a reporter for Democracy Now!, right? Many of us have been through this. There are costs to challenging power. I want all of us to get through that process together, right? What is our strategy for dealing with repression? We have to develop strategies for doing that. At the Liberty Tree Foundation, which has been dedicated to building a democracy movement since our inception over 10 years ago, we have been doing that. It's one reason why we've invested in democratizing defense, in building organization among veterans and active duty military personnel, so that when the time comes, there is a division among those who hold the guns. In Wisconsin, the governor tried to call out the National Guard. They refused to appear. He tried to bring in the police. They joined the protests. The FBI joined the occupation. Literally, okay? That's what we have to do if we're gonna dare to win, not just to struggle. So I'll leave it there, and I want to thank all of you for joining us for this conversation.